Welcome, everybody, Fáilte, to the first of our new Irish writing series. And we've got three award-winning writers with us this evening. And thank you very much to our BSL interpreter, Tracy Tyre. So we're talking today about two collections of Galway Stories. I have them here behind me, the 2013 collection and the Galway Stories in 2020. Yeah, by Doire Press. We have the editor, Lisa Frank, and indeed the co-director of Doire Press with us. We've also got the co-editor, Alan McMonagle, who is a contributor to one of the collections, and another contributor, June Caldwell. So I'll tell you a little bit about the writers, and then I'll talk to them for about 20 to 30 minutes, and there'll be an audience Q&A at the end. There will, of course, be a link to buy the books, which I strongly recommend you buying from Five Leaves Bookshop. June Caldwell is a writer whose stories probe sexuality and disturbing psychology and the darkness and light that lives within us all. And you'll see some of that disturbing psychology and the humour in the story she reads for us tonight. She has her latest collection of short stories is called Room Little Darker. And June has a novel coming out. I believe it's expected next year.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Alan McMonagle had a story included the original Galway Stories, and he's going to read something from that tonight in 2013. As I said, he's the joint editor of the latest collection. And he has a recent novel out, Laura Cassidy's Walk of Fame. Lisa Frank was originally from LA and moved to the west of Ireland in 2007. I'm assuming that was for the weather, Lisa.
That was definitely for the weather.
If any of you know the west of Ireland. And my friends that live there tell me it rains every day. I've had some lovely days in Galway, but it does rain a lot. So the anthologies we're talking about tonight, they're really beautifully produced, lovely covers, and they've got photos in them. So looking in detail at the stories and the collections, tell us something, Lisa, about these anthologies. Tell us about the origin of the first collection, how this idea came to you.
Okay, well, first, thank you for having us. And a big thank you also to June and to Alan, who I'm thrilled that they were able to do this because I love both of their stories. So this came about because I had gone to Paris when I was 40. And it was my first time going there, and I wanted to get a book that wasn't a traditional guidebook. And I thought, oh, how about short stories? And let's see if there's something like that. So I found an anthology called Paris Tales, which I'll hold up. And all the stories were set in the neighborhoods of Paris. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I thought it was a different way of seeing Paris than through a traditional guidebook. And I just really liked the idea of it. And there were photos inside. And I really liked that also. So I kind of, when I got back to Galway, and I had only moved there a few years before, so this was in 2010, I was just kind of very still in love with the city, the way you are when you first move somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so I just had it in my head when I got back of, why not do something like this for Galway? And kind of like a celebration of both the city and its writers, because I'd gotten to know the city and I'd gotten to know a lot of the writers that have lived there, including Alan, for one. He was actually the very first writer I met. And I thought it was an interesting idea to do. And as I said, it started in 2010, and then it finally came about in 2013. And it also, part of the idea also was that when I first came to Galway, I came as a student doing a summer writing course. And there were so many books that I wanted to take home. And I actually did ship a big box of books home, but I would say that most people would not do that. So that was another idea for doing an anthology of that we're all set in Galway. And one thing I also want to say is that doing Galway Stories 2020 kind of gave me a little bit of a chance of a do-over And not to say that I'm not proud of Galway Stories 13, but the big mistake that I think I made was not having a co-editor. And I don't know why I didn't do that, but I got the idea to definitely have a co-editor, and Alan was my first choice. He was actually the only choice. I don't know what I have done if he said no, so I was very happy that he said yes.
So, I mean, Galway is very beautiful, but you don't have to know Galway to enjoy the stories, but it is a wonderful introduction to the city. What's special about Galway, do you think? Why does it attract so many people? I mean, there's such a vibrant literary scene going on there, or it was before lockdown, but also lots of people go there, settle, never leave. What's special about Galway?
Well, I think all three of us could probably answer that.
Mm.
I'll say, to me, it's probably a mixture of the landscape, which I think contributes to the people, and the people contribute to the landscape, if that makes any sense, as well as the fact that so many of the people, like myself, like Alan, and like June when she lived here briefly, are blow-ins, and I think that makes it interesting.
Yeah, for those who are not Irish listening in, a blow-in, somebody who's come from somewhere else. If you stay for a place for 50 years in Ireland, you're still a blow-in. I know there are places in Britain that functions like that as well. Alan, you're going to read some of your story for us, and this is from the 2013 collection. Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, sure. I was delighted to have been asked to contribute to the earlier collection, the first Galway Stories anthology. At the time, it was around about 2013, I had been living in Galway for a fair stint of time myself, a blow-in also, like you say. And I was also working on a collection of stories that would become the collection titled Psychotic Episodes. And many of these stories were very much inspired and infused with the landscape and the people that I had been immersed in for quite a long time. So when Lisa asked me, did I happen to have any Galway stories? I mean, the fast answer was yes. I mean, the next thing was, would they be good enough? And then which one? But the story I'm going to read from, it's one that I still have a soft spot for, because it's probably based, it's one of those stories that's just slightly deviates from the truth. And I think in that gap is where you can often find effective stories, effective pieces of fiction. It's called Women Drivers on Taylor's Hill. It's Taylor's Hill itself. It's a hilly road leading out of Galway or leading into Galway, depending on which way you're coming from. But it's a road of big houses and at times even bigger cars. And it can be a very tricksy road and a very busy road if you catch it at a certain time of day. It's a road I used to take on my bicycle on my way into town. And for a stretch of time, I had an unlucky knack of coming off second best with the traffic. And my experience, if you like, essentially gave me an idea for this story. I'll read it from the start and go about halfway in with an eye on the time that's in it for us this evening. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and big thanks to Five Leaves Bookshop for hosting us this evening. From the start then, Women Drivers on Taylor's Hill. The first time it happened, I was on my way to the hospital to see my father. He was weak and frail and didn't have long to live. My brother in London had no interest in coming over. My brother in New York was too busy making money. My third and final brother was wandering through hills in Nepal and didn't want to be contacted. They were an interesting, if self-centered bunch, my brothers, and it saddened me that they had come to have such little regard. I was mulling all this over on my bicycle, freewheeling down Taylor's Hill, when I slammed into the car door. It was my own fault, really. I should have known better than to set off down the hill on a school day afternoon, especially at 2:30. It was when school finished for the day, and in order to pick up their little boys and girls from the school at the bottom of the hill, parents tended to park wherever they could along this stretch of the narrowing road. It was a tricky stretch at the quietest of times. The crossroads junction usually generated a lot of fist waving. The lights were erratic. Something unforeseeable was always likely to happen. So I should have known that this woman was going to open out her car door as I sped by. You could be doing a lot worse for yourself, Enda, I told myself a few moments after I had landed on my arm and was wiggling back into place a small fragment of bone that had come away from the tip of my elbow. I'm okay, lady, I said, as she looked down at me from where she was standing. You were going very fast, she said. Don't I know it, I said, rubbing some blood out of my nose and glancing over at my flattened bicycle. Every time I come down that hill, I seem to pick up speed. Well, be more careful next time, she said, and hurried off in the direction of the school. My dad had a tumor in his kidney. Last time they checked, it was roughly the size of a tennis ball. They told me if they took it out, there wouldn't be much of him left. He was now enjoying the morphine. I had asked my London brother to come over when I explained the situation. Mark, I said, he will be gone in 6 weeks. It might be good for you two to speak before the end. But he had no interest. There had been a lot of stuff between them back in the day, stuff Mark wasn't ready to let go. All I could do was keep him informed. Paul, my New York brother, was rich and said he might be able to fly over closer to the end. It all depended on how things went with a project he was currently busy with. Until he had some key people on board, his hands were tied. This was the kind of language Paul spoke, had been speaking for a long time, and I found it difficult to convey what it was I wanted to say to him. Anthony, my wandering brother, remained out of contact. He was the youngest of the four of us, and since our mother's death several years ago, was searching for a meaning to his life. His search had taken him to many faraway places I doubted I'd ever get to see. But so far, none of them had turned up this special meaning he was looking for. I was going over all of this in my head during my next cycling trip into the hospital, coasting the wraparound swerves, doing my best to flee the cut stone walls that always tried to close me in. By the time I was coming down the hill, I was trying to figure out a way to entice my London brother over to see our dad one last time. And I was hoping that things worked out smoothly with my New York brother's business project. And I was wondering how hard it might be to get a message through to Anthony when I was clobbered by a woman in a jeep who claimed she was trying to overtake me. For a minute, I had no idea what was happening. On the ground beside me, I could see my bicycle, the ticking spokes of the back wheel, the warped front tire, a broken pedal. Luckily, I had landed on my kneecap. Already I could feel blood seeping out of it, but at least I had spared my brittle elbow. From her driver's seat, the woman in the jeep was calling out something to me. You didn't leave me much room, she said, leaning slightly toward me. You're probably right, I said, rolling up my trouser leg for a look at the damage. I have an unhappy knack for veering out at the wrong moment. I'm in a rush, she said, glancing down at my leg. I have to be somewhere else. It's only a scratch, I said, dabbing up the blood with the handkerchief fetched out of my trouser pocket. Off you go now, no harm done. But be careful, lady. Watch out for crazy cyclists. She revved unusually loudly, sped away, and drove for a further 50 yards or so, then swung her cumbersome vehicle expertly up onto the footpath alongside the school railings, just beating a driver approaching from the other direction to the last remaining parking gap. I picked myself up off the ground, gathered my damaged bicycle, and made my way to the repair shop. You should get yourself a car, my New York brother had said to me several times over the course of the past year. Hell, I'll even spot you the price of one, Paul said. That's really generous of you, Paul, I said, but I don't need a car. Really, I don't, I continued when I heard the sign coming through the receiver. And it was true. I didn't need a car, didn't want a car. I was grateful to him for the gesture. Save your money, I told him. Oh my God, you poor thing, the repairman said when I introduced him to my damaged bicycle. It could have been worse, I said. Worse, he said, bringing his hands to his face. What happened? No, wait, don't tell me. I've had a rough day. He had taken the bicycle from me and was cradling the handlebars. He knelt down to take a closer look at the mangled tire. He gently placed his greasy hand on the chain. At any moment, he is going to burst into tears, I thought. How soon do you need it? The repairman asked me, as soon as he managed to compose himself. Could you have it by tomorrow? I asked him. I'd like to get into town to get some things. I will try, he said, but I must warn you, I'm not a miracle worker. There are many bicycles needing repairs, as you can see. Later, I called Mark and told him Dad was fading fast. He's not going to be conscious for much longer, I said. Is there anything you want me to say, Mark? I asked my brother. A message I can pass on. There was a momentary silence at the other end, and I thought he was trying to form some parting words, something that might go a little way toward mending the rift that had come between them all that time ago. It still wasn't too late, and that's how I thought Mark was starting to see things. No, he finally said into the silence, there is nothing. Then he hung up. Things weren't going so smoothly in New York either. People are dragging their heels, Paul told me when I called him. Negotiating this deal is going to take some finessing. Call me again in an hour or two, he said. I might have some more news then. After that, I wondered if I should get in touch with Anthony. I paced the kitchen, tried to locate the 7 or 8 numbers Anthony had passed my way over the past few years. I rang 2 or 3 of them, but the number was either no longer in service or made sinister noises at the other end, and so I gave up. Later again, when I put in another call to New York, I was informed everything was moving quickly toward the edge of a very high cliff. Thanks. I leave it there.
Thank you very much, Alan. It was a wonderful reading. And thank you, of course, Tracy, for interpreting. I believe, Lacey, you've got a story to tell us about Alan's story.
Yes. A few months after the book came out, we had a writer visiting us from Kent, actually. And we were driving from our house into town, and she was saying how much she liked the book. And she specifically said that Alan's story was her favorite. And we were chatting about Alan's story. And it just so happens that as we were chatting about it, we were approaching Taylor's Hill, where the story takes place. And I said, oh, this is Taylor's Hill, coincidentally. And she said, and she looked around, and then all of a sudden I look out the window, and there is Alan McMonagle. And not only that, but he's on his bicycle driving down the hill. So anyway, if you're watching, Joe Hemmond, hello. And that's the story.
Lisa, I hope you milled into him deliberately.
John was driving.
two wiggly bones to prove it.
Yeah, I've got cuts and scratches all over as well. You are going to have to buy the book if you don't already have it, anyone who's listening, and find out what happened in the rest of the story. It is really good. Thanks, Alan. So, Lisa, you talked about these black and white photographs of places central to the story. You said because you had seen it in the original Paris stories. Can you tell us something about working with the photographer and choosing the places?
Well, yeah, the photographer, to be very honest, he was given a very rushed job because we got the grant very last minute. So as soon as we got the grant and the go ahead to go ahead with the book, he then had, I think, 2 months to get all the photos done. And he was actually one of our poets called Kevin O'Shea, who unfortunately has since passed away. Yeah, and basically what he did, and the photographer who took the photos for the new book, Galway Stories 2020, they were basically given all the neighborhoods, and they then went through and took photos and just tried to capture the spirit of the neighborhood. They weren't, I said, don't try to get the most iconic view of Galway. For instance, we didn't really want Galway on its, picture perfect sunny day, but just more interesting photos like this one here, I think, is one of my favorites. And then besides the photos, the book also contains maps and listings of pubs and restaurants and hotels, as well as icons that our graphic designer Trina Walsh made, which is in the new collection. There are a bunch of them on this map here. Yeah.
And it's full of interesting details. Like, I didn't realize that Eyre Square had been renamed, and it never took, because I never knew it as anything except Eyre Square. I didn't realize it was another official name. That, it's not the only place in Ireland, indeed, that happened to, where they tried to change. The pictures are amazing.
Yeah, this one, I think we're all missing this photo right here of Naughton's pub. I've been there with June and Alan. I think maybe June and Alan together even.
Soon again,
Really
hopefully.
Yeah. So this is one of the icons that I mentioned. This is in Salt Hill. This is from the new book. That's the Spanish Arch right there, and the museum behind it. And it's an icon of the Spanish Arch. It's the cathedral. Oh no, that's Nicholas's. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be the Claddagh.
Yes, thank you very much, Simon, for showing the images for us. The short story form is really popular in Ireland, and more so, for instance, than in Britain. Is there something different, do you think, about the Irish short story, or is there a reason for it being popular? Alan, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I'll have a go. I'm sure June and Lisa might want to weigh in as well. Well, for starters, I mean, I've met short stories from all over the world. I mean, every corner, and I'm always envious and admiring and covetous of their abilities. As far as at home goes, the Irish short story, I mean, I think we have a tendency to take the words literally, short and story. There's such a strong oral tradition at home. Telling stories to each other is essentially how we communicate, conveying, describing, using a lot of colorful language, similes and metaphors, and always, I think, leaving room for either the listener or the reader to complete the story for themselves, which I think is a quality the short story thrives on. I remember we had with a great geography teacher, and he seemed to have an endless well of similes from which he was only too eager to draw from at every opportunity. You know, if brains were elastic, you wouldn't stretch a wren's garter. If brains were chocolate, you wouldn't fill a Smartie. I mean, I used to make lists of these things, listening to him. Benny Nerney, if you're out there, thank you so much for these, for this gold that I have, that I have indeed used. But yeah, it's just the way that we use English, and never forget that, you know, it's a received English that we deploy. But as well as that, I think there's something anarchic about the Irish spirit, you know, a tendency to flout convention, if you like. You know, we always want to push the button you're not supposed to push. And I think this sensibility finds its way into Irish writing, especially into the Irish short story. I think we're very good at suggestion and inference and implication, and that sense of everybody knowing everything and saying nothing. I mean, and then again, these are qualities I think the short story thrives on, you know. Yeah, don't know if anybody wants to add on.
Well, I'm going to be more cynical and say that, that I was thinking about this. Yeah, no, that it's probably, I feel it's a way that we buy each other's company. Do you know what I mean? To sit and tell stories. You know, you want to keep somebody in your company for as long as possible. You nearly always tell them a story. This is what occurs in the pub, in our homes more recently, or wherever. And I have really found that. I mean, you can walk into a pub in Galway, for instance, and end up being told a story by somebody, whether it's true or not. And it's, you know, it could be somebody who's like considerably lonely, and they just want your attention for 20 minutes, and they'll tell you a story of some sort. I also feel really that Irish people are always trying to justify themselves. We're always feeling answerable to somebody, you know. I don't know if that's because we have a complex kind of relationship with guilt. Do you know what I mean? You're always kind of overcompensating and trying to explain yourself. And to do that, you really have to do it in a roundabout way by telling a story to get to the point, you know. I remember one time, just hilariously, when I worked in the Irish Writers' Centre, one of the staff was 10 minutes late into a meeting. So she spent 20 minutes telling a story about how she had to go and get her cat, some cat Gaviscon from a very particular vet in a different part of the city, because the cat was eating more mice than normal because they were building this illegal building in the back garden of the other house. And it just went on and on and on for somebody who was to explain that they were just 10 minutes late off a bus, you know. So yeah, I think it's something that we do quite naturally. As writers, I think it's a form that we have, you know, we assume there's less tolerance needed. You know, it's a shorter commitment time. You can jump in, you know, create a world, create a scenario, create havoc, and then jump right out again. Of course, the truth is you end up teetering with them, will probably be more than with a novel, but there is the illusion that you need to spend less time, less commitment with a short story. And for me, I just love the fact that you can write in one book, you can cover so many different themes and topics and whatever. You don't have to stick to the one thing for 120,000 words, you know, very simply. But yeah, I think we're just natural storytellers because we're blackguards and we're constantly having to tell each other what we're up to.
Yeah, and that influence of the oral tradition is great. I mean, you know, it took me a long time to realize that lots of the stories we grew up on about, well, leprechauns and the rest, they're actually little short stories themselves about Finn McCool. I mean, some of them come from a cycle, but on their own. Anyway, you're going to read part of a story for us, June. Do you want to tell us something about it and then read?
Yeah, I'm just going to say leprechauns are real. You know, they are real. Let's be honest here. There are still many leprechauns living in Ireland. All you have to do is come out of the airport and you'll see them. You know, driving taxis or running along the pavements. So yeah, this is a story about a leprechaun who's in a bit of a fuddle with his marriage. I don't want to give too much away, but he basically finds out that he's a leprechaun. He wasn't really aware that he was. And now it's come to his attention. So I shall read from it, possibly just a little bit in from the story, and then obviously then I'll jump out before the ending as well. In my day, our kind didn't marry or get with women folk much at all. Well, I'm about to contradict myself here, thinking about it now on the hoppity hop. Us lot being male and solitary by nature, sure, but there were no female counterparts to be chasing after and moping over. Those that lived on the fringes of common sense, the not all theirs, as the saying goes, they'd take us on all right, had an appetite for it. In secret, small bouts, intense ravishes in fields and ditches, bouts and about in the lichens, liverworts and algae. In truth, it took a lot of darting up legs to get used to these strange new geographies. Different basins and bales, smells and such like. The slower types were a bit more open-minded, but I suppose, like everything, it had its run until word got around and the clergy got involved. Those kinds of interactions were the death knell for a farmer's daughter, as you can imagine. The Christian-centric life cycle and all, I tell you, Jesus. There'd be no messing with that. Some ended up behind high walls with no chance of free air. That exact type of saga, I says, an identical narrative, is what the Bible is sold on. But who'd pay heed to the oldest leprechaun in Ireland? Tomás O'Healy. They'd rather stick with duplicities them lot and micromanage. People along these stretches were always better to able to maintain genetic diversity in beef stocks than in themselves. After, if I'm viciously honest, 'twas a dirty business. No one sets out to try and wipe out their feckin' tribe, you know? Pleasantly lustful one minute, howling at the mound turk. The next, it's hiding lumpy heads of newborns, those fluctuating facial symmetries, crooked legs. Sometimes the little squealers were smashed up with shovels by uncles or brothers, buried in the sands up at Mannan Bay. Over time, it made people a lot smaller, but smarter on the hoof. Then it had to be stopped altogether. It'd hook you in looking over its own shoulder, trying to start itself up again. Sure, before it was bad, it was good, and after it felt good, it turned bad. Back down the line, we lived in harmony, 'tis what I'm saying, for small pockets of time in any ways. Then we were cast out again when mutations got a bit more obvious. Our Malachy wouldn't be here at all if it wasn't for that buck-teeth girl with dull eyes from Talladuff. Nope, 'twas now political, the two lads at the door, tells our Malachy. Him in no mood for this at all, the heading them. They were straight up, no joking about. From the West of Ireland Family Association, a coordinating body for a network of government-approved genealogical research development projects, based up there at NUIG and unaffected by Brexit, enjoying independence and non-interference from the hard sciences, autonomy and the likes. They were able to make some startling discoveries. He should sit down and take a bit of a breath, they says. None of this was going to be comfy on the gulp down. Going back a rake of generations, unquestionably in the affirmative. Malachy belonged to the purest and most majestic class of ancients, older than the Celtiberians and not even vaguely connected to the R1b haplogroup. By the time he was starting to take it in or give them any credence at all, they had their hooves in the door jamb, and Malachy was not minding his sap too well. Spinning, so he was. Trying to figure out who'd be up to it. Lots of headway with Irish DNA. They were finding out the full extent, Beardy of the two explained. Had Malachy always had that spinal curvature? Was he teensier than most going back to the early years? Did he have woeful concentration, an affliction with giddiness mixed with a short temper, halitosis and headaches, an ability to foresee and forecast? For the love of horseshoe crabs, the fucks wouldn't shut up or put a twack on it. He slammed the door and told them they had to have 20 minutes was all. There was only one long ago Firish stopping him, kicking them boyos in the nuts or flinging them out onto the tarmac. A series of blackouts and brain blips when he was a very young yoke, months of alarming visions and nightmares that left him hospitalized. What the psychologists had whittled down to plain old neurosis. He imagined he was living in fear of the mallet, a situation that could mash you up if you reeled a pointed foot too wrong. Destined to spend his nights roaming the landscape with nothing but yellow stainer or horse mushrooms for company, his head pounding with the arrival of the unlucky quarter moons, being chased goodo by barbaric badgers, ones that lacked the mental schooling to realise he might have social standing amidst the crags and scarps and magic peoples of the Tirac. Didn't he have to grab onto the substratum of a stinking sheep to escape some forest animal's instincts that battered the fuck out of him? These dreams, or whatever they were, daymares, they showed a different face, an old hospice face stuck onto a liquid cat frame of a toddler. In these visions, he may have been seeing himself in the far past. Thought the whole place was out to get him. Word getting around, posters yocked up in hedgerows with rewards for hunting him down. It seemed so real, and for a while it was concluded he must be proper sick in the head. These were no dreams though, and I had no way being caught in between worlds of letting him know what it meant. 'Twas normal to be feeling these things, no shame in it. These days there's so many feckin' festivals and public upchucks of artistic frippery by way of an overdeveloped art sector that any bollocks could wiggle weave the cobbled streets of Galway, going berserk, calling himself a fairy or a madman. But inside these terrifying incubuses, which were analysed the piss out of and made factual by an authentic fear of having been adopted, he couldn't escape the inkling that he wasn't on a par with everyone else. Something seemed to be very wrong. 'Twas a series of portents and forebodings he was having, plain as flour. When he got to his 16th birthday, his mother admitted he wasn't adopted in any kind of official sense. Found by a couple of fishermen wandering along the hydrangeas and azaleas of Outer Edge, Connemara, crying his lamps out. There was little or no legislation then, finders being the keepers all right. The whole country driving drunk despite Middle Eastern petrol shortages, and Mountbatten getting fried alive over there in County Sligo. They took him in anyway, thinking little of it, fussed over him, made him their own, bought him all the toys he could only have dreamed of, donated a dozen handmade hurley sticks to Skullenda in place of any kind of birth certificate. By the time a couple of summers had been and gone, the dreams had stopped clear and his quirky ways were on a par with any other GAA-obsessed teenager. The best he could do for himself would be to think of them as his only family now and put away any notions of looking for the ragged lot that abandoned them. Your people, your clan on your father's side, they owned shoe shops in Galway and Athenry from early times. Is that correct? He could see where they were going with this. I was watching him there, like. Up he jumps and heads to the kitchen to tear open a jumbo-sized box of Barry's tea. We've a map here, your man shouts after him. It's a 1651 map of Galway. Shows the Shoemaker's Tower where Eyre Square Shopping Centre is today, Shoemaker's Lane, Borina Sudari, the Road of the Shoemaker or the Tanners at Buttermilk Walk. Malachy was only barely listening to the two boyos. He could put an end to their delusions by telling them he was adopted. None of this applied. No, instead he decided that if they wanted the fucking leprechaun, he'd give them one. Danced in, doing a sideways jig, cracking circles around the coffee table, twisting his face up like a leather purse. I was trying to give him tactamac on the telepathic, me, O'Hillihy, dun-coloured, mighty, artistic, bald plunderer, free from jealousy, a hound of the sea, but foremost, a fire-sprung sprite, primogenitor of Malachy's for nigh on 500 years. Hang in, wee man. It'd be no bad thing to embrace your true nature, pull it back to basics. There's a lot to be said for a full moon on a dark night and the road downhill all the way to your door. But him being deaf as a haddock, he carried on losing the Nelly regardless, resorting to what our kind does under pressure, turning off his inner sheep-caw, breaking his balls laughing, singing away to himself that soft cell ditty, Sex Dwarf, Ashgagan. Achnesh, you're my Achnesh. Isn't it nice? Either live a slice, Dolly's on disco in Rem and Vice. That's what Kayleen called him, her sex dwarf. Found nothing offensive in it, though it made him squirm. All of this could be just a super prank manufactured by his good friend, Micheál O'Shaughnessy. His snake begrimed dreadlocks and the high breeze at Spanish Arch, putting 2 randomers up to it for a price of a few gargles. Are you 2 plums for real? Who sent you? Malachy says. Did he notice an increase in blurred vision around electric streetlights? Was he plagued with heartburn? So many questions and forms to fill out and suggestions for what should happen next. Would he mind going public on it? Would he be up for some formal tests?
Very much, June. I was just trying to find my button for the camera there. You're going to have to buy that collection and find out what's happened to Malachy. June, are you going to tell us where that story came from? You're going to tell me now you know a leprechaun?
Well, I'm probably from a family of leprechauns, but yes, no, I was actually staying down in Lisa's house, Lisa from Doire Press, right here. One time she was lucky enough to head off to America to do a reading with John, her partner, and now hubby. And they said, come down and stay in Boreen. And of course, coming from the city and your head is full of noise, and you arrive in a place like Connemara, and off they went. And I'm down this windy Boreen with a high-fired imagination. I've no car to get out of there, you know, and the imagination starts going overtime with the weather at nighttime. And the house is kind of creaking and the land is almost coming in and scratching the windows. And I just thought to myself, Jesus, I can just imagine that there's pockets of leprechauns still living out there and they've managed to survive under the radar. And what would that be like, you know? And it's the perfect landscape for it. And, you know, if they did now and then come out onto the main road and hop on a bus, they wouldn't be out of place, not really. Shouldn't really say that, but I have got the bus in from Connemara a few times to Galway City Centre. So that's where the idea came from. So I started writing it when Lisa was away. I think I went there to write a modern day crime story about Dublin, and I came away with this leprechaun in my head. So, you know, Connemara can be very addictive in that way.
Yeah, and it is a very wild and beautiful landscape. And I know what you mean. There is something kind of fey and odd about it as well. If we have one more question from me, and then we'll go over to the audience and see if they've got any. If your audience out there, if you're listening, I hope you are. Can you put the questions in the Q&A, please? I can see people are chatting away, but if you put questions in the Q&A and we'll come to them. The language is significant in the stories. Like you've got the Hiberno English idiom, you've got the Irish language that you use really effectively in that story. What is it about the Irish, the mixture of language and the way we juggle language, do you think that contributes to our writers? Well, Alan, can I ask you that?
Yeah, I can have a go again. I think well, part of it is, like, I think I mentioned it already. Most of us in Ireland, you were writing in English, but it is a received English. And this makes me think of the way that Irish writers use the English language, I suppose. You know, the English we use, it's ever so slightly warped and bent out of shape, and it's slightly skewed. You know, it doesn't always read cleanly and pristinely. And I think this can make for usage that is surprising and unusual and refreshing and original. You know, I think of writers like, obviously, you know, the obvious ones that come to mind are clearly Joyce and Beckett. I mean, look what they did with the English language. And also the great humorist Flann O'Brien. But I recently reread an early Edna O'Brien novel, Night. It's a slim enough novel, I think from the early 1970s. But it's, you know, it's a word fest of a novel. It's an absolute treat. And, you know, that makes me think of the sentence for sentence brilliance of writers like Claire Keegan, And having listened yet again to June, the sentence for sentence anarchy of Miss Caldwell herself. I mean, I think all of those writers and many, many more, they've taken the English language and reinvented it almost and made it their own. And I think it's a lovely thing for writers and to see writers finding new ways to say what it is they want to say and finding new ways to tell their stories. So I think that's part of what we have going for us as Irish writers writing in English. Yeah.
And June, you've got that humor and so much of the actual Irish language itself in your story. It's very funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I borrowed little bits. I'm not an Irish speaker and I don't have a good handle on the Irish language. Obviously we learn it in school up to a certain point, but because there's another language there lurking in the background. For some of us it's in the background, for others it's in the forefront, but you can pluck bits of words and meaning and you can mix them around and juggle, and we do that anyway with English, as Alan said. There's like everyone will have examples of their mothers coming out with the most ridiculous sayings that make no sense, that you have to learn as a child to kind of interpret into meaning itself. Like my mother would say things to me like, about somebody, she'd say, your man, he has his glue. I'd walk off and what the hell does that mean? And it kind of meant, he has a cheek. He has a cheek to be asking that or doing that. He has his glue. And when I asked her about it, she'd no idea where it came from. Her mother, it was a phrase her mother would use and her grandmother. And you have to go tracing these kind of sayings and finding out what they're about. And I think we're used to just borrowing from language, mixing meaning, being playful with language in a way that perhaps they're not in countries that would just, be mono, or would have one language and use that to great effect all the time. And I lived in London for 7 years, and I was amazed at how brilliantly people express themselves, but they never veered off the perfect use of the English language. And I think here we're just playing around with it all the time. And I think writers do that to great effect in their work, and it's great to be able to find a new way to say something as well, instead of using all the usual kind of. You have to try and avoid cliche and avoid the usual ways of saying things. So I think it's just a playful way to approach the story.
Just want to have a look in the Q&A, see if anyone's. You're being very quiet out there. Well, I've got one more question. We are going to have to wind it up soon. But Lisa, Doire Press publishes poetry, short stories. You've published a play by Eamon Carr. What are the challenges of juggling so many genres, Lisa, as an editor?
Well, mostly it's just the two genres, just short story and poetry. The play was a one-off for us. I would say we actually like to keep just to two. I think a lot of publishers publish more than that. But for us, we like sticking with the two. We'd actually at this point probably publish more poetry books and short story collections. We like that, and I think we found our niche with that. And that allows us just to kind of keep our focus really tight. Every once in a while, we think about doing novels, and then we think, oh no, let's leave that to the other people, the more serious publishers who, are interested in making some more money. So we always have the joke that we publish the genres that don't make any money.
There are keen readers. Well, I certainly buy short stories and poetry. Alan, you co-edited this latest collection. Did you fall out at any stage with Lisa? Were there hills you were prepared to die on? Can you tell us something about the editing process?
Did we fall out? I don't think we fell out. I was delighted and chuffed and very happy to have been invited to co-edit, and then to get a chance to read through this wish list of writer submissions as they came in. That's actually essentially what happened. A wish list of writers was drawn up. They were invited to send in a story. And I think by and large, all the stories were new stories. I mean, we had several fond memories of them, several strong coffee meetings, lively discussions. I remember when we went over and back about Pat McCabe's contribution, the Galway Spike, for a long time. And that was a story that featured a mix of both Irish and English, fucha fucha, as we call it over here. But that was a lot of fun. I mean, I remember I had to enlist the services of my Irish-speaking mother to help decipher some of the more elusive phrasings in the story. And making it more fun, if you like, was that the author, Pat McCabe himself, he's a former teacher of mine. And I enjoyed impressing him very much with my knowledge of his story. I didn't tell him, I didn't let on that I was receiving copious amounts of assistance from my mother until he asked me essentially how I knew so much. But there was another writer sent in two Galway stories. I liked one and Lisa had a preference for the other. So we let the writer have the casting vote, and in that case, Lisa won out. There's a great story set on that magical island of Inishbofin. That was a story involving the poets Sylvia Plath, Ted Hughes, Richard Murphy, and an incident involving a famous kick under a late at night bar table. That was a story by Elaine Feeney, which was a nice hello to another Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath story that appeared in the initial anthology, a story by Nuala Ní Crochóir, Nuala O'Connor. But by and large, the anthology, it took a while and it took a few meetings, but the stories were coming in. And I mean, it was underwater for a long time, but it rose, and we could see the stories taking shape, and the book as a whole more or less presenting itself and declaring itself to us. And once you can see it, it just charges you for that last effort to get the entire thing over the finish line. But yeah, we still speak to each other. I would still hope to meet for strong coffee and more.
I love the fact that there's so much Irish. I did need to look up bits in dictionaries that I'd forgotten as well. But I mean, one thing that's remarkable about Galway is going around and hearing people speaking Irish and speaking a mix of English and Irish on the streets. We're going to have to leave it there if there's nobody out there asking us any questions. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. And I really do entreat you out there listening the joy of reading these books. They're so funny and entertaining. And they're really beautiful artifacts as well. So thank you very much to Lisa for producing them and Doire Press, and to Alan and June for reading tonight. And thank you, of course, to Tracy for interpreting. Thank you to Arts Council England for funding this. And do come along and join us next Friday when we've got Kerry Ní Doherty. She's talking about her memoir that has politics, nature writing, and a really interesting book, Thin Places. She's being interviewed by Patrick Lim, who's a trustee of Nottingham, UNESCO City of Literature. And our next, on 21st of July, our next Doire Press event of short stories will be on Belfast stories. And I'm going to leave you one question. It's not quite a serious one, but I'm from Carlow. Is there going to be a Carlow collection?
I mean, we never say no.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll have to get canvassing the people I know over there and see what we can do. But thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Simon, for technical support. Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.